So, if I had a loved one that I knew was leaving, going somewhere, and I knew they were going to have to deal with violence, I couldn't train them, but I could only give them one book. What book would it be? Most of you guys are going to say, oh, well, it's your book, Tim, When Violence is the Answer. I wish I could say it's the case. But I'm going to have the author of the book that I would give on today. And I'm really hoping that it's going to be thought provoking and really make you think about the realities of violence. This would be the book, Meditations on Violence. Now, before I introduce you to the author, I want to make sure that everybody, spreads the news of this channel. Keep subscribing, keep telling your friends about it. It's really been helpful. The feedback I've been getting from all these interviews that I've been doing and some of the other, information that I've been putting out is outstanding. We're creating a lot more content based on your comments and your questions. So looking very forward to that, but please help grow the channel. All right, now I'm going to introduce you today to probably the guy that I got to say, he's kind of, I say this in the interview, he's kind of my litmus test. If people don't know Rory Miller and they never read Meditations on Violence and they want to talk to me about self-protection, self-defense, oftentimes I refer them to that because we'll have a much better discussion, a much better framed discussion if they understand what's covered in Meditations on Violence. And Rory is a no-nonsense guy. We've talked a couple of times in the past, and this is the first chance I had to do a really in-depth interview. So it was a 2-hour interview. I've broken it up into 4 parts. Every part is absolutely relevant. You're not only going to want to buy the book after this, you're probably going to want to check out Rory's training, which is Chiron Training. And he explains that in the interview, how he came up with that name and what that means. Incredibly thoughtful guy. An amazing writer, but what's interesting is you have one of these rare situations where you have a practitioner who literally immersed themselves. He's a former corrections officer and led CERT teams, has just hours and hours of hands-on with many different types of criminals, and his instruction is just rock solid. But what's interesting is rarely do you have a person who's a really great practitioner who also is an amazing communicator. And that's what he's accomplished in this. His ability to write and his clarity in writing when it comes to violence is, it's just spot on. I can't say anything better than that. So listen, let's get right into it. Let's hear from him. And then I'll make my closing comments. Hey, Rory. Hey, thanks a lot for doing this, this interview. I think people are going to get a hell of a lot out of it. Something you probably don't know is you're kind of my litmus test for people when they want to talk to me about self-protection, self-defense. So meaning I always work in the idea of, meditations with violence. And if that's not in their reading list, and the conversation is going to be very different, because I know they haven't really delved in. I really feel, you've written a lot of great stuff, and you're a very good teacher. But I really feel that Meditations, it's just such an interesting book. There's so many good things you can pull out of it. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is the overall theme, and I've never really heard anybody put it better, of the idea when people get into the idea of training for self-defense, martial arts, whatever the motivation is. Your concept of the rhinoceros versus the unicorn is such an invaluable way to look at things. And could you talk a little bit about that and how you came up with that?
We can. That's one of the hallmark. We have a joke within my particular circle of friends that I'm not allowed to name anything. We have something we call the Violence Dynamics Seminar, and I wanted to call it the VD Clinic. And yeah, so
I get it.
I actually wrote that as the rhinoceros and the unicorn because that was the image that was sticking with me, because we want it to be so pretty, and we want it to be logical. We want everything to make sense. We want there to be one answer for each problem, one right answer. And it just is so much messier than that. And most people weren't okay with that. I've run across so many One, and I'm terrified that I'm going to say this to an interviewer, and the interviewer is going to go, well, I say that sometimes. But one guy I ran into, goes, well, this is just physics. If you hit 10 people exactly the same way, you're going to get the exact same result 10 times. It's like, fuck, you have never fought more than 2 people.
Yep.
Because none of them are the same.
Yeah.
And it's I'm going to go off on tangents and rants, me.
Perfect.
But that's one of the things that is most valuable in this. It's not about the fighting. It's not even necessarily about the staying safe. But if you can get to the edge where you're comfortable in chaos, where it's okay that you don't know what's going to happen if you do this, you just trust that you're going to figure it out. That puts you in an incredible place to take control of your own life and to just deal with chaos. My wife has a thing in the bathroom. It's like, you can't control the winds, but you can adjust your sails.
Yeah.
You're not in charge of this. You're only in charge of you. And if you're okay with that, it's a superpower. If that terrifies you, then you're just going to be a frozen little puddle. And that doesn't help anybody.
Well, it's interesting because when you get into this, and I remember as a kid, when you see violence, like real violence,
Yeah.
versus a quote unquote fight. I come from Irish background, Boston. My uncles were very, very capable. And I saw the difference between a trained individual and a violent individual. And it's a very different thing when you see it. And in some ways, I feel I was fortunate to see it as a young kid because it quickly, showed me the difference between a controlled environment, albeit, combat sports can be very challenging and there's a lot there. And I got a lot of respect for those guys. But when you add in the chaos that you're talking about, I often put it, when it comes to violence, reality is, disappointing and very inconvenient at times. And I really got that in your writing, in your approach to things, meaning I think people would take it sometimes as being pessimistic, and I don't take it that way at all. I think it's the most sobering way you can look at things because everybody's susceptible to it, and oftentimes your training doesn't match reality, and you don't know that until you've had to apply it. And you've had a tremendous, for people that don't they've heard your background, but the hands-on that you put on in the prison system is such a great testing ground because of the environment itself, the individuals that get put in there, and the fact that you got to be very results oriented. And so when you when you go in with a CERT team or you go in as a lone officer dealing with things, you had to be very realistic about what your expectations were and what to expect. And I don't think there are a lot of people in this industry that come from that perspective.
And you have to see it globally. It's one of the guys I really like working with now, Malcolm Rivers. I grew up in some of the worst sections of Boston.
Right.
And one of the things that within the jail, it was a what's the word I want to look for? It was a global thing. It's not just that this incident was going to happen. You have to write your reports and be done. It's you be going back to the same place with the same people who now knew a little more about you and maybe a little more motivated to come up with a better method. And so you had to manage the dynamic of the entire group and the dynamic of the aftermath. And you had to, and Malcolm coming goes, it's kind of the same thing. When he goes to most self-defense classes, they talk about the issue, but he can't handle it that way necessarily if he lives in that area. Reputation management is a conscious skill that has to be filtered into this when you're going to the same environment. If you're traveling halfway across the world and something happens and you take care of yourself and you fly back, then you don't have to worry about who they're related to and who their cousins are. Right. And they have to manage their reputation. But when you're in that environment, it's way more about the people skills, both for handling the aftermath and for seeing it coming and for preventing it, than just the physical skills.
Yeah, one of the examples you give in there is the idea of if you had to fight a combat sport, how would you go about winning? And you give the very true criminal response of well, on Tuesday, I'd capture the family. I'd go in, and I'm giving an approximation of what you said, but that just jars people when they hear that, because it's all of a sudden their whole fantasy is gone, and they go, wait a minute, that's not fighting. They're imagining a duel between two people with agreed upon conditions. And as soon as you take them out of that and you realize, no, it's just that easy. If you're really serious about what you're talking about, then hey, here's how I do it. And it has nothing to do with what they imagine it should be or what they think they're training for. And the reason I think that's valuable for people to tell them, listen, I train people. I do. I guess what I've learned, if I've got any wisdom over the last 30 years, is figuring out that the vast majority of people that I come in contact with, I'm not talking about my operators or any of those people, they say they want self-defense, they want self-protection, but what I really have found out is they really want to live a life. They want to learn how to live a life that minimizes the chance of them ever having to use self-protection or self-defense. And that's a very different concept. And once I made that switch, I'm okay, offering this stuff, because you realize very quickly that the worst thing you can ever do is give people, and I think you're excellent at this, is give people false expectations or false hopes. And you're very good at pointing out all the variables, and it doesn't necessarily make for, the most profitable. I know on my end, basically I tell people, hey, best I can ever give you is a 50-50, in a situation. That's not really a great marketing technique. But the honesty of it is it's just not there in the majority of the source material that I see that's out there that people regularly read.
There's about probably 5 things in there we could talk about for hours. Most people who want to go into martial arts and self-defense want to see themselves as a hero in a movie. And so they have that idea. When you're talking about people really want to be the kind of person this doesn't happen to, I don't think that's necessarily true. That's the mature point of view. But the immature and the really common one is everyone wants to go through the worst day of their life without having to change anything about who they are now, and with nothing changed about who they are afterwards. That's the fantasy people are latching onto. And this is where we get I already know how to take care of myself. And it's like, no one knows how to take care of themselves. You know how to take care of yourself at this level, but there's other levels out there that'll squash you like a bug no matter who you are. And so they want to, so they're preserving the story of themselves way more than themselves. Once you get into that mature point of view and see this as a global thing, then you become a different kind of person that can handle more things on more levels. Some of those levels that you couldn't even see when you were young and full of spit and vinegar and trying to think about how to win a fight, as opposed to how to turn the situation to my advantage with no hands going on. The thing about fighting is when there's a fight, there's a loser, and the loser is incentivized to try to figure out how to win next time. And unless you put someone down permanently, there's always a chance of a replay, and they're continuously learning more about you. That's
the interesting thing that you see oftentimes is you see the temporary victory. I give a there's a video that I shared with people, and it's in an Australian prison, and a kickboxer went in I think he's up on ecstasy charges, trafficking. He was a legit champion. I guess he went in the day before his first day in and kind of tried to let people know he was there. I guess he beat down one of the prisoners pretty well. And the next day he was, they had him sitting at a table. One guy was distracting. Another guy comes down with a pillowcase that has a little panini grill in it that his buddy in the kitchen got for him. And he literally put the guy, into a coma. Just 2 quick shots right to the head, because of exactly what you said. Meaning they saw the skill set the day before. They said, okay, I know what this guy can do. Therefore, I don't want to deal with that. And here's how I will deal with it. And people get really upset, like you'd say that. And the people that get the most upset are the people that are trained in that manner and think that somehow that gives them some sort of a pass, or someone you're invulnerable to somebody who just wants to do, injury, just wants to, intent. They're not going to play the rules that you're imagining.
And in a lot of ways, martial arts is a lot like a religion, in the sense that the big religious questions you can't know. It's not a matter you don't know. You can't know. When you start postulating a God that can change the rules of causalities, it's a non-disprovable hypothesis. You can't know. In martial arts, you've invested however many years, however much money, however much sweat and blood and time on something that you also can't know. Because even if you have one encounter, 5 encounters, or 10 encounters, or 100, that you know the next one's going to be different. And I find that with experience, it's like this will sound weird, your confidence goes up, but your sureness goes way down. It's I trust myself more than ever, but at the same time, I know the next one may be totally different. I may be totally unprepared, and I may be caught completely flat-footed. And that's just the way it is. The people that have only trained and haven't tested really, really, really are incentivized to believe like it's a dogma. And that's,
Yeah, there's nothing more jarring than the first time you have to use something and it doesn't it doesn't
yeah,
go the way you want. Like you've been told it's supposed to go this way. It
yeah.
went that way every time when you're sparring, when you're going in, and then you actually do it on somebody who's not playing the game and you don't get the result.
I
And
angulated a guy's arm from here to here. Didn't snap. He wasn't even sore the next day. He was one of those hyper mobile, flexible joints, and it was, yeah. I was getting
yeah,
my ass kicked. I desperately needed to break his arm.
well that's and then there's the other side of it where I had a spec ops guy who over in the sandbox got grabbed. He went right into his training, went right in, he's a grappler, went right in, did a Kimura, like literally did snapped. He felt the arm snap and the guy kept coming.
Yeah.
And it was a shocker. He ended up grabbing a knife and, got a, was able to kill the guy. But the other guy, he said, I was doing martial arts. The other guy was just trying to kill me. And he said, that's the last time I'm doing martial arts, and that was his thought process, which doesn't mean that what he learned was invaluable. It was his mindset and what he expected.
Yes. It's the expectations that'll kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's so worthwhile to go through your book, because, there are a lot of guys, I've met a lot of guys that have very good experience, and then I've met other guys who are very good writers and very, very good communicators, but you rarely get the two. And how, I'm a little bit curious on that end too. And I don't want to go off on too many tangents, but how did, did you always have an interest in communication and writing? Because you have an amazing talent for talking about a very difficult subject in very, with a lot of clarity. It's really, it's a difficult, I know I try on my end to get some of that stuff. And I really appreciate when somebody has that skill set. Was this something that you were always in? Because, I know a lot of people in the law enforcement community and very few of them can write, not that they're stupid or anything, but they don't have the clarity of writing that you have. Is that in your background?
Okay. So I'm going to do a yes, no, maybe. And
Okay.
I'm going to give you way more than you want in this. So when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer when I grew up because I was a reader. And then that fell aside in college when I took a creative writing class and thought this was bullshit. The instructor didn't like what I was doing. I didn't like what the class was doing, and I just kind of quit. No longer had any interest. Then had to write a shit ton of reports. And later in there, I was talking to a friend who was a writer, and this was a time when instead of saying, I did, it was this officer, then it was third person.
Third person,
yeah. And someone, a writer friend, pointed out that's weak and that's passive voice. And I had enough training to know what those words meant. And so I was encouraged to start writing the reports as if I was writing a story. So use the word that has the most impact instead of the word that seems the most neutral. And the reports started getting better. It's a point where it's very rare in our society right now to blow a hole in somebody and not get sued.
right?
But the reason I wasn't sued is because the report was so detailed and so good. So I was writing to keep myself out of trouble. And that doesn't mean that I was lying or doing anything, but I was being super accurate. I was trying to write it as well that the person who was reading it was right there. And so the decision I made was the only decision they could see too. So I'm then, but not really any interest in writing for other people. Meditations, there's an essay in there about baggage.
Yes.
All that crap in there happened in 1 year. And for the first time, it wasn't settling. I never took the fights home. I never lost sleep over anything I did. But for some reason that year, nothing was settling. And so I started writing just to get out of my head. And I told this story a million times. My original plan for the Rhinoceros and the Unicorn was in the old Japanese traditions, there's a densho or a scroll, sometimes called a makamono, that you give to your students. So it's like, you've studied the curriculum, this is it, you're now an instructor, but this is the stuff that I couldn't really tell you in class. And that was my thought process, because I was just tired of that shit in my head. And I showed it to friends, and the friends I showed it to all had a little bit of blood under their belt and a lot of training, or a lot of blood and little training, but enough that they would be peer reviews. And Chris Wilder sent it to his publisher and then told me. So I had the advantage of, I wasn't thinking about trying to be a writer when I wrote it. I was just writing it for me. And that's probably, here's the fatherly advice part. You're a good communicator. You're a good storyteller. You're a good, I guarantee if writing's hard for you, it's probably because you're trying to be a writer instead of just telling the story.
Yeah. Well, I took it too as, it's funny you said you wrote it for yourself, which makes a lot of sense. But I also took it like, I took it as somebody who's just like, they're at the end of their rope as far as patience with the bullshit. Mm-hmm. But there's somebody that they give a shit about. There's somebody they care about. And that's who you're writing to. You're writing that one person that you're like, okay, listen, I will take the time to do this, even though I don't want to, because I don't think you're going to grab all of this. That's really the tone that I got in a very encouraging way, that you put it out. It was almost like, listen, I'm not going to varnish anything here. I'm going to give it to you just as I did it. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but here's, to date, this is everything I can give you. And you got to go take it and do something with it. And that was powerful. That was really, I remember the first time I read it, I just told people, I said, hey, listen, if you want to understand what I try to say to you on certain things, I said, this is far beyond that. I said, this is really well thought out. And I said, if you don't have this understanding, like I truly think people should read Meditations. And this isn't about, just talking about your book, but I really feel this is true. People tell me they want to train. Mm-hmm. I say, great, read this book first. Yeah. And once they read the book, they've got context. They've got the idea, okay, what do you really want to do now? If you want to go off and just tell yourself, hey, okay, I want to go do this martial art because I like it, I think it's fun, I want to compete, great. But now you have context. Yeah. You're not going to make it into something that it's not. And if you want to go the other route, it'll be a harder road because you're going to have to find some stuff, and there's no payoff. That's the other thing in training for violence, training for what you're talking about, training for self-protection. There's no ego payoff. And what I mean by that is you're flipping the coin every time if you choose to use it, if you have to use it. And so, the payoff is you get to survive, and the other person, is either under control or you're there. But the ego payoff that you get from like combat sports and competition and a lot of the things that I see right now, like people, especially in the military and law enforcement community, they use it more as an esprit de corps type of a training, rather than, okay, what does the job really need and what does the job really require? And that whole idea coming back to people, and if we haven't conveyed that yet, that's what I love about the rhinoceros and unicorn. The rhinoceros, as you describe it, is truly, basically this is violence, and it's right here, and it's not hiding from you, and it's a real object that's there. The rhinoceros is real. But what we've done is we start having these fantasies, and we come in with this mystical unicorn. Yeah. That's what we think is reality. And the problem is the unicorn's way more fun to believe in. And there's way more ego payoff to believe in the unicorn. Dealing with the reality of this massive, rhinoceros, and oh, by the way, you're probably going to get part of the rhinoceros you know, in your idea. To get the whole beast is really a difficult proposition. I just thought that was a really great metaphor to kind of teach people that, you know, you can study for a long time, you can have a lot of experience, and you still won't get it all.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And the same, if someone wants to do sports, or they want to do, if they want to do kata because puts them in meditative state and they love it, there's nothing wrong with that. The one thing I'll push back on a little bit, because it's really easy when you focus on danger and crime and person to person violence and all that. Once you put everything in that context, it's like there's, like you said, there's very little ego payoff. And it's putting yourself in a dark place all the time. And that's really, it's ineffective, it's bad for you, and it doesn't actually help that much. One of the things that I try to push to students all the time is that everything that we're doing will give you some percentage points if it ever goes bad, but it's going to make your life better tomorrow. It's going to make your life better today. All the awareness skills, yes, if you're only looking for people wearing, you know, longer jackets than they should in hot weather, you're just going to get paranoid. But if you become a people watcher, they're the most fascinating animals out here, and it gives you the same stuff, the same skills that let you know that that guy's got something on it on his hip under his jacket is also going to let you, exact same skills going to tell you when a friend has a limp that they're trying to hide from you because they don't want you to know what happened. It makes you a better person. The physical skills, completely aside, it's fun if you train and do it right to throw people downstairs. Having a body that does what you want it to do is way more fun than having a body that's been sitting on a couch eating potato chips. It's, the body is more fun. So all these within the skills, it's really easy to focus on that dark side, but I really push people that this makes your life better. If you go to a class and you leave the class more afraid than when you got there, the class probably was not good for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. The idea is, the idea is to kind of, you know, face that 800-pound gorilla that nobody wants to talk about once you're in the room. And then once you realize that it's like, just like anything. I mean, I have a firearms business, and it's amazing the people that have the irrational fear of firearms. And when you come in and just let them have the familiarization of it, they'll probably never own a firearm. They'll probably never do anything. But you know what they've done is they've got rid of that irrational fear. They know, they now understand it. They know what it does, and they're able to go on. And it's the same thing with training. When you've looked at these uncomfortable situations, and then you've also, you know, dealt with that. And I think a lot of people, I think the hard thing for a lot of people, especially in the way I know the way that you teach and stuff. I think a lot of people have a hard time realizing that they're actually pretty good at this. You know, it's actually in us. And I think that's the hard thing for people to wrap their heads around. And if you can show them that, hey, this is a natural skill set, this is something that, you know, this is why we're here, because we were really good at this stuff. You know, our ancestors were, and that tapping into it does not make you a criminal. It allows you to live a less paranoid life, actually, and you can enjoy things more. Exactly what you're saying. You know, it's amazing. I've seen people that you would be surprised when you first meet them, when they come to you, and then the person that leaves, a very different person. And not because they become superhuman in anything, or they're an amazing practitioner. It's just their mind has understood, you know, what was out there before, and now they're aware of it. But they're not, like you said, they're not walking around in some sort of a paranoid condition the whole time.
Yeah. When you see me writing notes, it's because there's something I want to talk about before I forget about it, because I've had way too many concussions.
No problem.
Yeah. So now I can't remember what it was. Damn it. That one of the things within teaching, especially when you're teaching something as deep as this can go, you teach it really superficially, right? You can have a class where it's, you know, stomp the foot, elbow, spin, done, right? And that's pretty much a waste of time. But when you get into a real self-defense class, one that's talking about awareness, one that's talking about managing human interaction, one that's talking about the difference between being a fighter and being a hunter, and it tries to access different mindsets. As an instructor, you're taking on the responsibility of re-engineering another human being. And that's like, if that doesn't scare you a little bit, you have no business teaching.
Yeah.
It is a huge responsibility. These people are going to come to you as one person, and they're going to leave as a completely different person, and you have no real control over how or in what way they're going to be different. And it's an amazing, and it's awesome, and it's a lot like being a parent, which is another parenting is kind of like we were talking about. You get all the training in the world, and then it happens for real, and it's like, oh my fucking god, I had no idea. Just
Yeah.
like being a parent the first time, you can read all the books, you can have everyone tell you, and the minute you hold that little thing in your arms, it's your world has changed in ways you can never predict.
When you take on that responsibility,
Mhm.
to work with a human being, do you how do you broach the subject with them about whatever their fears or realities were prior to that? You wrote in the book about I forgot how you put it, but it was basically, if somebody's experienced trauma in some way, shape, or form, I always say, listen, I can never undo what's been done to you. What I can do is I can introduce you to some new concepts that maybe will help you, go forward. But I have no illusions that I would be qualified nor able to, do anything, or invalidate that experience, or, make it go away for them. And I think that's where I really like how you put, the idea of people, the uncomfortable situations where, hey, sometimes there is no answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes, people have experienced things that you can't really do anything about. But you can, if you just stay focused on what you can do and what you can give them and have no illusions about that, as an instructor, that's a very important skill set. And
It is.
And nobody really covers it.
Well, and it's largely reframed. One of the I think really common or almost universal mistakes we think of we as instructors do is we tend to think of what we're doing as something we're giving them or something we're teaching them. And so when we start thinking the mindset of undoing their past, we can't do that. Fix them, that works under the assumption they're broken, and that's a terrible assumption. They survived whatever it was, and maybe they feel shitty about it, but they survived. And there's no way that we can tell them that you can't tell someone they survived wrong. So this has nothing to do in a lot of ways with me teaching them. I have to do everything I can to give them the tools to create the person they want to be. And it's so there's no end state. I don't want them to end a certain way. And there's also no if you set yourself up in the power dynamic where you're the guru and they're the subject or whatever the mental equivalent of a peon is, that you're and they're here, that's still victimizing them. That's still keeping them in that mindset where it's not their control, not their power. And it goes to any good team. You push the power down. You give the people as much responsibility as they can handle. One of the things I think is hyper important is when someone does have a meltdown or a flashback or whatever. Can you, Tim Larkin, honestly tell me that you never had a flashdown or a meltdown or a flashback?
Oh, hell no.
Yeah. Right. So it's like, it's one of those, if we make it freaky and weird, then they'll think it's freaking weird. It's like, shit, that happens to me too. Happens less with time. It's completely normal reaction. It's not a symptom of a problem. It's actually part of the healing process. So don't try to, when you're ready to come back, take a couple deep breaths, come back when you're ready, because you're in charge.
Yeah.
It's we too much I ran about this all the time. Too much in martial arts and self-defense. We try to make every fucking thing special. All of our ancestors have done this. It doesn't take, I vomit in my mouth a little bit when people start talking about, we forge warriors in this class.
Yeah, I know.
It's like that the meekest, tiniest person you can imagine, if they hit the right triggers, will tear your face off.
Yep.
They have that inside them. Our job is to awaken it, let them know not to be afraid of it, give them the tools necessary to both access it and control it. But it's them. They are the ones doing this. They're the ones that do the growth. All we do is facilitate. We're way more like gardeners than we are like school teachers. or
Yeah,
instructor.
because they have to do the work. I
Yeah.
mean, they all we can do is provide tools and guidance.
Mhm.
And like I said, I just if I will one thing that I love to do when I see other people training is I'll see the instructor, I'll watch the instructor,
Mhm.
and if the majority of the students move exactly like the instructor, look exactly like the instructor, I'm not saying it's necessarily always bad, but you just sit there and you realize, okay, everybody's human machine is different, and you
Yeah.
should give them the information, and then what they do with it, how they make it their own. And I think that's really, really important that people understand that, because I move very differently than a lot of
Mhm.
my other, like a lot of my other instructors. And in fact, there are some people that move that I'm absolutely jealous of it. I wish my body could move that way. I wish I had those skill sets. But I
But
don't.
you move differently now than back when you had all your own joints.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, man.
Yeah.
That's the reality of getting older, man. You start to
Yeah.
realize that the mind's still there and your body's just going, dude, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You're that was 10 years ago. Um, okay. So I wanted you to hear that first portion of this. This is where we're going to end this, and then Rory and I take it up tomorrow. More uncomfortable truths. And listen, I'm not doing this. I hope you understand that the punching, the kicking, the physical dynamics of training are absolutely simple. And most people have a hard time. Like I said, the hardest thing most people have is the fact that we're already kind of pre-wired for this and good for it. But how do you put it in context and stuff? And what Rory is so good at is giving you the total picture. Like, how do you choose an instructor? How do you look at this? He asks the uncomfortable questions, and he gives you the uncomfortable answers. I really, really appreciate that. So listen, you're gonna look forward. Part 2 is coming up. It's awesome. Um, Again, this is a book that I highly recommend. Get it on Amazon. The links will be in the in the show notes and all that. But definitely, if it's not in your library, get it in there. And we'll talk more about other assets that you can get that Rory's put out, as the interviews go on. But anyways, that was part 1, and looking very forward to part 2 for you guys.